Good morning. So can everybody see the little tower up here, at least a little bit? Has anyone ever played Jenga? Well, I had not until I set this up here, so we're going to see if I can make this work. They say that the game is to, like, each person puts a block together and then you keep adding to it. Is that right? That's how it works? And then you pull things out. Now let's see, Damon said this one. No. But you start pulling them out until eventually it falls, right? I lost. It's not the first time. We're going to look at 1 Peter 2 today. And Darlene actually graciously put them up on the screen, I think. Because once again, I told Ryan when I was kind of reading this over to him, I was going to blame it on him for being on the computer all day yesterday, which is why I didn't get it done. But so 1 Peter 2, we're going to look at verses 4 through 10. As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by men, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For in Scripture it says, "See, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame." Now to you who believe, this stone is precious, but to those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the capstone, and a stone that causes men to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the message, which is also what they were destined for. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. And so I have a question. Has anybody here ever felt rejected? All right, we got half the rooms, I guess. I think it's safe to say, whether you want to admit it or not, that at some point we've all felt rejected in our lives. You know, it might be by our families, or by the people that we thought knew us well, or it might be by people that thought that they knew us well, but they never really did. Regardless of who rejected us, that feeling of rejection that we feel, it hurts. Think about, and I told Ryan to come up with good football player names, and he had way too many, so we're going to go with the generic football player. And they, from a young age, decide they want to play football. And so they eat whatever it is that football players eat in order to be good football players. And they train, and they go to practice, and they tackle people, and they catch balls, and they run. I'm thinking that's what they do. And so this football player, he makes it. He does great in high school, and he does great in college, and he makes it into the NFL. And then he's 1 year into the NFL, and he twists his knee, and he can no longer play football. And you've seen these players that when they can no longer play, that their lives completely crumble, that it just goes to nothing. And it crumbles because football was that cornerstone that they were building their life on. That was the stone in which they continued to build everything on, and when the football stone crumbled, their entire life crumbled. Think about Wall Street. Like if you have these men and women who strive on Wall Street, they continue to make money and more money and more money, and then Wall Street falls. And what happens? You hear of these suicides of people jumping out of buildings because they feel like their life was over, because that's what the money was, the cornerstone that they built their life on. they were rejected. You know, the football player was rejected by football. The Wall Street people were rejected by money because they built their lives on the wrong stone. But what about, have you ever thought about a whole race of people? Back in 1954, Congress had a law for desegregation. So they made a law that the black children were to go to school with the white children. It was to be mixed in 1954. Yet in 1963, black children were still not allowed in white schools. And they were still being segregated despite laws, like laws from Congress that said otherwise. And so Martin Luther King wrote a letter from Birmingham, and he wasn't staying in some nice hotel room, but he wrote from his jail cell in Birmingham. And I'm going to read to you a little bit of what he wrote. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward gaining political independence. But here in America, we still creep at horse and buggy pace towards just gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it's easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, well, just wait a minute, just wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will, drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, when you see the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and to see the tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and to see ominous clouds of impurity begin to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness towards white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean? When you have to take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and color. When your first name begins nigger and your middle name is boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John, and your wife and your mother are never given the respected title Mrs. When you're harried day by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why it's difficult to wait. So I think about, I hear that letter and it just makes my stomach curl, and I think about those people and how rejected they felt. And this wasn't a one-time deal. I mean, this was for hundreds and hundreds of years. And Martin Luther King was sitting in jail, and he was not someone who acted in violence. I mean, that came later, but he did not. And so I started thinking, how could he have done that? And so he and the people that followed him, they continued in this rejection, but it didn't destroy who they were. It didn't destroy them. The rejection didn't crumble them to the point he didn't hang himself in the Birmingham cell. And so there were some researchers that did these studies, and because they had the same questions, like how could that have happened? And what the common denominator was the church. The common denominator was the love of Jesus Christ. These people would come together and they would go to church, and they didn't do church like we do church. They would be in church for hours and hours and hours because they were able to rejoice and to worship and to just be with the one who fully accepted them. That was the one place that they could come where they didn't feel rejected. Because they knew that Jesus himself didn't judge them because they weren't white, but he embraced them because he made them exactly the way that they were. And they came to be held by that one that called them precious, said, I love you, you are my children. And they could come and they could talk and they could pray and they could talk to somebody who'd been rejected. They could talk to someone who knew what it felt like to be rejected by the very people who should have known who he was. By the one who was rejected by the people who walked with him. And they knew that they could come. And they knew that they would be chosen. And they knew that when they were in that place, when they were in that church, when they were there together, that he was calling down to them and saying that you are mine. You are my children. And so we are his. I think we could say individually, each and every one of us, he has called us. Judy this morning standing up, calling her name. But I want you to look back in your Bibles at verse 5. Verse 5 says, you also, like living, what's the next word? Stones. Not one stone, but that S on the end of the stone, that means more than one, right? And that leads me to believe that Peter's talking about there's more than one person being built into that spiritual house. Because it says we are like living stones being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood. I don't think that he was talking about a building either when he said spiritual building. I think he was talking about each person being built individually so that they could fit together corporately. If we talk about being put together, I would say that all of us probably come from different backgrounds. I mean, some of the same, but we all come from different places, different walks of life, and we've had different places of experience, and yet each week, for some reason, we come together into this place, into this sanctuary, to worship God together. And I don't really know what brought each of you to Barkeyville. I mean, maybe you've always come here. Maybe you married into the church, and so now you have to come here. Maybe a friend invited you to hear a great worship service. You know, they said, oh, come hear our worship band, it's great. Maybe you read a baby's obituary, and you decided that this was the place you had to check out. But for whatever reason, you're here. I'm here, you're here, God has put us all here together under that precious cornerstone of Jesus Christ. And now that we've been brought together, how can we be built into this holy priesthood? And I think it has something to do with how we know one another and how we love one another. It's in our interactions and the intertwining of our lives. C.S. Lewis wrote about this in his book, The Four Loves. And so I want to read to you just this little paragraph about what he wrote. Lamb says somewhere that if of three friends, A, B, and C, A should die, then B loses not only A, but A's part in C, while C loses not only A, but A's part in B. In each of my friends, there is something that only some other friend can fully bring out. By myself, I am not large enough to call the whole man into activity. I want other lights than my own to show all his facets. Now that Charles is dead, I shall never see again Ronald's reaction to a specifically Caroline joke. Far from having more of Ronald, having him to myself, now that Charles is away, I have less of Ronald. Hence, true friendship is least jealous of loves. 2 friends delight to be joined by a third, and 3 by a fourth. If only the newcomer is qualified to become a real friend, then they can say, as blessed souls say in Dante, here comes one who will augment our loves. For this love, to divide, is not to take away. Of course, the scarcity of kindred souls, not to mention practical considerations about the size of rooms and the audibility of voices, sets limits to enlargement of the circle. But within those limits, we possess each friend, not less, but more, as the number of those with whom we share him increases. In this, friendship exhibits a glorious nearness by resemblance to heaven itself, where the very multitude of the blessed, which no man can number, increases fruition, which each has of God. For every soul, seeing him in her own way, doubtless communicates the unique vision to all the rest. For each soul communicates the unique vision to all the rest. That, says an old author, is why Seraphim and Isaiah's vision of crying are holy, holy, holy to one another. The more we share the heavenly bread between us, the more we shall all have. And isn't that the same thing that happens with us? I know Judy in different ways because I've seen the way that she relates to the kids and the way that she loves those kids. But yet she reacts and talks with John in different ways. I've heard Stephanie pray for Judy. And so I know Judy not only in my interactions with her, but in her interactions with the kids and John and Stephanie and everybody here. And in the same way, isn't that what we're doing? I can see Jesus in a different light. Because I hear how Raymond loves him in the way that he sings. I can hear how Connie talks to her father and the way that she prays. We see Jesus in ways that we wouldn't see him if we weren't here together. It's so important because all of these stones, they're all held together by each of us. And so we're called to be built up together, to build each other up. We're called into this holy priesthood. We're called to be people who have been chosen, people who have been pulled out of that rejection to declare his praises. And so you might say, but how can I do that? How do we do that? You remember the darkness that you were pulled out of. Because if you felt rejected, then you've been in a dark place. And you think about those times. You think about the times when you felt you were unaccepted, when you were alone. Times when you felt like your entire life had crumbled. I know I've been there on more than one occasion. I've built my life on unreliable stones that crumbled, and they fell because they couldn't hold me. And when it crumbled, I crumbled. Then I tried to build it on another unreliable stone, and it crumbled too. And it took me to a deep place of darkness until God opened my eyes and I realized that the cornerstone that I needed to build my life on was him. And you might be thinking, we have not been where you have been, Heidi. I would say that's a reason for praise, number one. That's a huge reason for praise. But because we're here together, I think there's something else in those experiences. Because the way that my experiences have shaped and molded me, they've carved that stone out of me. By sharing them with you, they've carved a little bit of your stone together. And so my stone's been cut in such a way that it fits up next to Raymond's stone, which has been cut in such a way. And Raymond's stone's been cut so that Connie's will fit in. And Connie's will fit in with Dale. And Dale's will fit in with Judy. So all of our stones have just been cut in a particular way so that we all fit together. And in our collective house is this holy priesthood, taking up what we know of God and sharing it with each other. And you shine my brokenness when you share it with somebody else into their darkness. You know, maybe you have a neighbor who's struggling with a sick mother, and you say to yourself, wow, I know Judy did that. Maybe I can hook her up with them, or maybe she can help me out and tell me how she went through it. Or maybe you work with somebody who's had a loss, and you say, wow, I know Connie's walked through that. Maybe you've got a sick baby, and you know that Amy's a baby nurse. You know, or maybe you just know somebody that has a bunch of kids, and you know that Dale and Chris are still here and they survived, so you could send them along. You know, there's some of you here that I don't know that well yet. But I know that God is carving your stone to just fit you perfectly into this place. And as we see the experiences of us being put together and being built into the spiritual house, we can go out to others and we can say, I know my God. If you feel rejected, so was he. If you feel alone, he died alone up there on that cross. We can go into that darkness and we can tell them the truth. We can tell them that there's one who accepts them. There's one who is inviting them. There's one that can come. And if they say, oh no, there's been too much for me. I've been cut way too much. We can tell them that we have a house that we come to, that their stone would fit perfectly in the place. If you could bow your heads with me. Lord, thank you for being our cornerstone. Thank you for being that stone to which we can build our lives on. Thank you for being the stone to which we can build each other up on. Thank you for this house of people who have come here together, not only to worship you, but to get to know you through each other. And Lord, if there's anyone here who's hesitant about that, who maybe has been rejected too much, it says, I can't even let my guard down here in this place. And Lord, I would ask you to do a work on their heart, that you would open up all hearts here to know that they are fully and rightly accepted. Because we're going to build this church. We're going to build our lives. We're going to build our lives on you, Jesus. And we thank you for that, and we praise you, and we love you. Amen.